My name is Angela Jackson, and I'm 35. I could hear my son Jonathan's breathing as he slept in his bed while I looked out the window, which was obscured by the rain. My 6-year-old son had fought valiantly against his newly diagnosed leukemia during yet another long and tiring day at the hospital. After pausing to take a lengthy drink of my coffee, I carefully unlocked my wallet. Even with health insurance, there was still a significant financial strain. Stacks of medical bills littered my desk, and every time I looked at the startling numbers, I felt sick to my stomach, which twisted in excruciating pain. I had already experienced many hardships and storms in my life. I was married when I was 25, but my husband Patrick abandoned us when Jonathan was 2 years old. Since then, I've been parenting my kid by myself while working as an accountant to support the family, although this challenge was unimaginable. My sister Samantha's name came up on the screen when the phone rang. I let out a sigh before responding. At last, you answered. Gabrielle and I are throwing a dinner party this weekend. Are Mark and Nicole able to remain overnight? I shut my eyes. How often did she ask this question? Gabrielle, Samantha's spouse, was employed on Wall Street, while Samantha was a stay-at-home mother of 2 children. They assumed that I would always be available to babysit when required, yet they were always occupied with social gatherings and excursions. I apologize, Samantha. Right now, that isn't feasible. Jonathan doesn't feel good. On the other end, there was stillness. We've spent weeks organizing this celebration, Angela. There will be important visitors. You know Jonathan has leukemia? I said, my voice tinged with annoyance. He's in the middle of treatment right now. Of course I know, but Samantha paused. Can't you ask Mom to take care of him? Both she and Dad say they're busy, I said mockingly. Okay, said Samantha icily. I'll look elsewhere. I put my hands over my weary face after the call. Family interactions were like this. I was always the one who could be counted on, and only called when necessary. I plucked up the confidence to phone my folks the next day. Both my mother, Megan, and father, Robert, resided in the suburbs. Despite their retirement, they were active at the golf club and on vacations with their friends. I whispered tremblingly, Dad, I need a favor. What's the matter? There was usually a hint of irritation in his voice. It concerns Jonathan's medical expenses. One component is not covered by insurance. I'm having some trouble. The person on the other end was coughing. You are aware that we are retired, Angela. I quickly responded, I know. But it's an emergency. Even when I began a second job, it is still insufficient. Why can't you manage your life better? He spoke in a chilly tone. It's troubling that you always contact your parents whenever you're in trouble. I didn't breathe. What are you discussing? I have never requested money before. Taking care of the family has always been my responsibility. I've planned Mom's birthday celebrations, watched Samantha's children, and even looked after you following surgery. As a family, that's what you should do. He continued, his voice lowered. Unfortunately, at this time, it is not feasible. We also have unforeseen costs. I refrained from crying. I understand. I hung up and then sat by the window and sobbed in private. I didn't know what to do, but I would do everything for Jonathan. Desperately, I thought about what I could do. It was challenging to ask other family members after my father rejected me. I wasn't sure what my father would say if he discovered that I had questioned other family members because he was quite proud. Shall I ask my friends? Borrow money from the bank? Launch a crowdsourcing campaign? Then, suddenly, assistance came. The call came from Kimberly, my paternal aunt. She was the only family member with whom I had a good relationship. She worked as a professor in far-off Seattle and was unmarried. She stated, Robert informed me of Jonathan's predicament. I was taken aback. Dad told you. Yes, well, Kimberly answered thoughtfully, in his own way. I'll assist you. I'll cover Jonathan's medical expenses, Kimberly stated kindly. I couldn't speak. But it might cost tens of thousands of dollars. My savings are plenty. In addition, This is for my beloved niece and her child, Kimberly said in a kind tone. This weekend, I'll visit. Then we can discuss the specifics. For the first time in weeks, I sobbed with relief after hanging up. The weekend then arrived. In the arrival lobby of the airport, I kept a close eye on the clock. Kimberly's aircraft was scheduled to land shortly. That day, Jonathan was feeling really good, and my friend Tiffany had promised to look after him. I was looking up at the flight information board when I heard a voice I recognized. Mark, stop carrying that rucksack. The aircraft has plenty of room. I pivoted. My parents, my sister Samantha, her husband Gabriel, and their 2 kids were standing there. They were all making their way to the first-class boarding gate with bulky travel trunks. My heart almost stopped. I observed them stealthily from behind a shrub. I've been anticipating this day. Finally, we'll unwind in Hawaii, Megan remarked. Robert concurred, saying, we really needed this vacation. Yes, in fact. Particularly in light of the previous few months. I was shocked by what I heard. They had said only a few days prior that they were unable to pay many $1,000s for their grandson's medical care. Did you tell Angela? Samantha inquired. Megan chuckled. Obviously not. All she would do was whine and fuss. She is not one of our kind. Samantha snorted, always playing the victim. Tears of heat streamed down my face. I felt as though I was having trouble breathing as my chest constricted with discomfort. As they vanished through the boarding gate, I realized how much I meant to my family. I wasn't really a member of the family. I was just a tool to be utilized when it was convenient, someone to call upon when necessary. Kimberly had already returned to the arrival lobby and was waiting. I sobbed as I told my aunt all I had witnessed while I was wrapped in her warm arms. How could they? Seriously, said Kimberly. I've watched Robert and Megan's behavior for a long time, but this is too much. I feel so foolish, I called out in tears. I've always been there for them. Kimberly told me, you are a good person, Angela, and she grasped my hand. There's nothing to feel guilty about. However, you must now defend both your son and yourself. I took out my cell phone while we were driving to Kimberly's hotel. I looked through Samantha's Instagram out of curiosity. A post had already been made. The caption read, it was a picture of the family grinning at the boarding gate. Hashtag first class, hashtag Royal Hawaiian Hotel, hashtag sweet room, hashtag family vacation. I gazed at the television in blankness. One of the priciest hotels on the island is the Royal Hawaiian. Jonathan's treatment costs might be partially covered by the price for a single night. As I spoke, my voice was shaking. I wonder if they planned this trip after finding out about Jonathan's illness, I remarked. Kimberly's lips were pursed. Your sister and parents have always put themselves first. Now is the moment to hold them responsible. It was enlightening to spend the weekend with Kimberly. In addition to offering to cover Jonathan's medical expenses, she urged me to reconsider how I interacted with my family. You're not their servant, Angela Kimberly informed them. It's time to set boundaries. In Jonathan's hospital room, I thought about this. The physicians were hopeful about the therapy, even though he was asleep and had a pale complexion. My mother had left many missed calls on my phone. Evidently, they were unaware that I had spotted them at the airport. I chose to respond. Where are you, Angela? I've called multiple times, Megan replied accusingly. A delivery was planned for today. Would you be able to get it for us? We will spend some time away from home. Hey, Mom, you won't be able to pick it up, in fact. How is the weather in Hawaii, by the way? Calmly, I asked. On the other end of the phone, there was quiet. What do you mean? Megan stiffened her voice abruptly. I know you're staying at the Royal Hawaiian, I said. I saw it on Samantha's Instagram. Oh, Megan said, trying to gather herself. That's correct. Gabriel unexpectedly received the tickets from a business associate, and he gave them to us as a gift. We had no justification for refusing. Mom, why are you lying? My voice faltered. I saw all of you at the airport when I went to pick up Kimberly. You can't be serious, Megan said, struggling to find the right words. I went on. I heard everything you said about me. I don't belong here. Are you embarrassed by me, or am I only a useful tool? Calm down, Angela, Megan ordered. It's a misunderstanding. I said, I'm not misunderstanding anything, with more force. A few days ago, you and Father said you couldn't afford a few thousand to save my son's life. But you can afford a first-class trip to Hawaii. That's different. No, that's precisely what it is. For the family, I've always been there. I've helped with your chores, watched Samantha's kids, and even looked after Dad when he became unexpectedly unwell. But you were nowhere to be found when I needed you the most. All you're doing is evading your own obligations. It's not our fault you became a single mother, Megan yelled. Her remarks wounded me, but I refused to back down. This has nothing to do with my decisions. This concerns the life of my son, and now I understand at last. You're not in love with us. That's ridiculous. No, that is the reality. I will thus put my son and myself first from now on. I will no longer serve as your handyman. What are you talking about? Anxiety mingled Megan's tone. I made a clear statement. I'm not doing any more babysitting, housework, or caregiving. I have my own life. Are you planning to abandon your family? Megan was enraged. Family. I gave a sour laugh. You were the ones who abandoned me and Jonathan. I ended the call. My heart was full with resolution, but my hands were shaking. Samantha called a few minutes later. How could you say such things to Mom? Samantha yelled. My son is fighting leukemia, and you all went on a luxury trip to Hawaii. I replied quietly, and you still think I'm the bad one. You always play the victim. Samantha lost her temper. We're free to do what we want with the money we earn. Of course, but then stop using me as a maid and a free babysitter. What are you talking about? Go forth, take care of your own issues. I'm no longer dependable. Don't you look around. Samantha had a strong voice. You're supposed to always be there for the family. No, Jonathan is the reason I'm here. My main focus is him. After a brief period of silence, Samantha said the menacing words, You're going to regret this. I regret that I didn't realize this sooner, I responded. After hanging up, I inhaled deeply. I promised that my family would never utilize me again. Kimberly, meantime, took the initiative. She got in touch with her father, my grandpa Nathan Jackson, after listening to my tale. Nathan was enjoying a comfortable retirement, and his children were ultimately expected to receive a large portion of his money. His possessions were a major factor in my parents' ability to live a lavish lifestyle. After hearing Kimberly's account, Nathan became enraged. He revised his will and phoned his lawyer right away. The inheritance for Robert and Megan is completely revoked, Nathan stated firmly. Nathan told me, instead, allocate that portion to Angela and Jonathan, which surprised me. You don't have to do that, Grandpa, I said. Yes, it's necessary, Nathan adamantly said. A family is barely a family if its members don't respect one another. Your father has never been responsible with money. He has wasted the money I gave him, and now he refuses to even assist his own grandchild. I can't forgive that. Nathan went farther than that. He gave Robert a call and told him to come back from Hawaii right away so they could meet. That encounter set off pyrotechnics 2 days later. In addition to telling Robert and Megan about the revisions to the will, Nathan also conveyed his deep dissatisfaction with their behavior. He confronted everyone with the reality by calling in Samantha and her family as well. It seems I've lived too long just to witness the shame of this family, Nathan remarked pitifully. My son and daughter-in-law refused to help with their own grandson's medical expenses. Robert attempted self-defense. Dad, you're misinterpreting the circumstances. We were simply. I am not misunderstanding anything, Nathan cut in sharply. Kimberly has told me everything, how much Angela has done for you all, and how you've treated her. Megan burst into tears. We recently went on vacation. Is that really incorrect? Choosing a luxury vacation while your grandson's life is at stake? Nathan said. Yes, that is wrong. especially when you're doing it behind Angela's back and then bad-mouthing her. Samantha's cheeks flushed. She portrays herself as the victim every time. She has actually given her life for all of you. This is how you repay her. Calmly, Nathan said. I've heard enough of your opinions. He got to his feet. I stand by my choice. My heirs are Jonathan and Angela. All of you must accept the repercussions of your behavior. The dynamics of the family started to drastically deteriorate after that day. Robert and Megan quickly encountered financial challenges after being cut off from Nathan's financial assistance. After years of relying on Nathan's assistance, they were suddenly having trouble making their mortgage payments. Samantha was in a similar situation. She and Gabrielle had continued to live off of Nathan's money. Although Gabrielle's pay was respectable, it was insufficient to cover their extravagant spending. I went on with my life in silence. With good treatment outcomes, Jonathan made a slow but steady recovery. Kimberly fulfilled her commitment to cover the cost of the therapy and even contributed money to help us upgrade to a nicer flat. I got a call from Robert a few weeks later. His voice sounded tired. Angela, we need to talk. Calmly. About what? I inquired. His words, we're struggling, were honest. We have received a foreclosure warning from the bank. Are you able to bargain with Nathan? I raised my eyes to the ceiling. Why inquire? You ought to talk to Grandpa himself. Samantha is also able to assist you. He's not answering our calls, Robert clarified. Samantha is also having difficulties. She and Gabrielle fight all the time. I said icily, that's their problem. Angela, we're your family, Robert begged her. Can't you forgive everything and help us again? Family? I gave a sour laugh. A true family helps one another out. When my son was ill, where were you? Robert's voice was resigned. That was a mistake. I admit it, he said. But now we need your help. Aid? No, Dad, I firmly responded. I will no longer be used by you. Take care of your own issues. I have a son, Angela. My top focus is him. Goodbye, Dad. A wave of freedom sprang within me as I hung up the phone. Samantha arrived at my flat a few days later. What's gotten into you? As soon as Samantha walked into the room, she yelled. Not helping our parents, I said coolly in response. She screamed, You didn't help my son. That's different. When I answered no, it's exactly the same. I was worrying for my son's survival while you were having a lavish vacation in Hawaii. And you want my assistance now. Keep me from laughing. All of my savings have been used for our parents. Gabrielle is talking about divorce, yelled Samantha. Calmly, that's your problem, I said. It has nothing to do with me. You're cruel, Samantha said, displaying her dread and rage. I responded in a low voice, No, you are the cruel ones. What I've been enduring for years is too much for you to handle for a few weeks. Accept the repercussions of your behavior. You're going to regret this, Samantha replied after a pause and walked out of the flat. But instead of regretting anything, I felt at peace, something I hadn't felt in years. My family's strain progressively decreased over time. Perhaps they understood that no amount of pressure would persuade Nathan, Kimberly, or myself to change our opinions. Antha and Gabrielle also had to adjust to a more modest lifestyle after Robert and Megan were forced to sell their home and move into a smaller flat. Through common connections, I periodically learned about them, but I had severed all communication with them. I initially felt bad, but eventually the emotions subsided. After a year of successful therapy, Jonathan's condition went into remission. I experienced optimism for the first time as I listened to the doctor's explanation. Kimberly came to visit one day. She was thinking about relocating closer to Jonathan and me after just retiring. Kimberly added, You two are my family, with warmth. I want to be close to you guys. I felt really grateful. I realized what family really meant for the first time in my life. It was about loving, respecting, and supporting one another, not just about family ties. I sat on the couch and showed her a recent picture of Jonathan. Hey, look, I said. He was smiling while on a school excursion with the water as a backdrop. Jonathan is really strong, just like you. Kimberly grinned. He has the same strength and determination. I became red. Kimberly remarked. I would do anything to protect Jonathan, but it's important to take a moment to consider yourself. I've watched you give up so much for Samantha, Robert, and Megan, and now for Jonathan. However, what about your personal life? My gaze was fixed on the window. To be honest, I'm not sure. My attention has always been on other people. It's a chance for a new start, according to Kimberly. I can occasionally assist with Jonathan's care if I'm present. You could begin a new endeavor. I was moved by what she said. I had repressed my own wants and aspirations for a long time. At last, I was free to go after them. I came to a big conclusion a few weeks later. I made the decision to launch a charity organization to assist single parents dealing with their children's illness or other emergencies using my expertise as an accountant. The organization's goal was to help them both emotionally and financially. I exclaimed, maybe that's what I really need to do, to Kimberly, using my experience to help other parents in similar situations. A pleased Kimberly said, you've always been strong, but now you're giving strength to others. The foundation expanded quickly. Nathan helped us make a name for ourselves in the neighborhood. A lot of support and money were brought in thanks to local media attention. I once discovered a sophisticated envelope in the mailbox after returning from work. Samantha was the sender. I opened the packet reluctantly. A handwritten letter was found inside. To Angela, I'm sorry for the extended period of time we haven't communicated. I've had an eye-opening experience during the past year. It took me some time to understand that all of your statements were correct. I had little empathy and was self-centered. I was unable to comprehend your predicament. Now that I'm in a similar situation, I can truly appreciate how difficult things are for you. I am forced to stand on my own 2 feet for the first time when Gabrielle and I part ways. It's difficult to live alone with my kids, but maybe this was the lesson I needed to learn. I'm happy to hear that Jonathan is doing well. You managed to conquer hardship and grow stronger as always. I'm not pleading for your pardon. I simply want to admit that you were correct, and I want to be a better sister if we ever get to meet. With affection, Samantha. I went over the letter more than once. I felt a range of feelings, including grief, rage, and deep down relief. I needed time, so I didn't respond right away. But something in me changed after reading that letter. It was a step towards understanding rather than total forgiveness. A few days later, I had a cup of coffee on the balcony after dropping Jonathan off at school. An unknown number phoned on my cell phone. The speaker said, "Hello, Angela, Megan. Please don't hang up." I stiffened. "What do you want?" Megan said, "I just wanted to talk," in a quieter tone than previously. "I heard Samantha wrote you a letter." I said, "Yes, I did." Megan stammered, "I want to apologize too," as she said it. "We treated you horribly. We simply considered ourselves." I said nothing. Adding, "I want to see you and Jonathan," Megan said. "Of course, only if you're okay with it." I pondered for a while. Although my family had endured and grown, they had also caused me much pain. Perhaps there was no need to keep the door locked forever, but reconciliation would take time. Finally, I answered, "I'll think about it. I can't promise anything soon, but maybe someday." Megan said, "That's enough," with a tone of relief. "I'll wait." I hung up and took another glance at the sky. It would have to be on different terms if my family were to come back into my life. What shape that may take is beyond my current imagination. I feel alive in my own life now, even though complete reconciliation may be challenging. I used to spend my life for other people, but now I can put my son's and my own pleasure first. Setting limits along the road and interacting with my family without sacrificing myself must be possible. Perhaps experimenting with a different kind of family is oak. Life isn't flawless. I grinned and took a drink of coffee. A fresh day begins tomorrow, and I'm prepared for anything it may bring. Nearly 95% of my trust fund for my sisters was depleted by my parents. Since they are family, I reasoned that it would be beneficial if I could forgive them. Let me just explain the problem. At the age of 25, I am the youngest of three sisters. My second sister, Carol, is 31 years old, and my oldest, Gilda, is 33. Since they were little, they have been close and mostly constantly together. That didn't bother me in any way, and I even thought that being by myself was more comfortable. Both of my parents, who are 63 years old, own a modest grocery store that has been in the family since my father's time. My parents put in a great deal of work and spent most of their time at the shop, which is the most important thing to them. Our family is equal, my parents used to say, as though the three of us had the same resources and chances. Each of the three of us sisters received $100,000 from the trust money our grandparents left us to finance our college education and early adulthood. We look forward to the day when we may spend it as adults. But I didn't give the trust fund much thought when I was younger. I considered making my own money and just using the trust fund as a last option. I began working as a landscaper in high school. My sisters were employed at my parents' shop at the time, but I had no desire to work there. Working for my parents didn't appeal to me, but I wasn't sure why. My parents are great folks, but they sometimes be too rigorous and work-focused at the shop. In addition, I didn't want to work as the boss's kid. I wanted to work for myself, because I could work outside and be active without feeling confined. The landscaping job was a good fit for me. I saved $220,000 from that employment throughout the years. Even though it wasn't a fortune, I was really proud of myself for earning it all. In the meantime, Gilda and Carol wasted all of their trust money within a few years of high school graduation. Both of them attended college but left in the middle. After a time of enjoying the journey, they brought the kids back home. Our grandparents ended up losing the money they left them. Carol was homeless for a while until landing a job at the family business, while Gilda was arrested for driving under the influence. Both of them were back at home by the time I reached 18, working for our parents and taking care of their kids. To be honest, I felt comfortable handling the trust fund when it came time for me to access it. I was already enrolled in college at the time, and scholarships helped pay for a portion of my tuition. I was making enough money from my landscaping job to concentrate on work while still giving my all to my education. I once decided to seek my parents for permission to utilize the trust fund since I was having financial troubles. I thought I would have no trouble receiving clearance because I knew my sisters had gotten the money without any restrictions. I was an adult at the age of 18, and I was sure I could handle the money sensibly. But my parents' response when I went up to them was a little odd. They recommended that instead of immediately giving the money, let's discuss this at dinner with the whole family. They just instructed me to wait without providing an explanation. An uneasiness began to creep into my chest at that very instant. Nevertheless, I convinced myself that my parents were only exercising caution and responsibility by thoroughly verifying the information. The entire family got together for supper that night. Every member of the family was there in the room, as my sisters each brought their kids. But as soon as we sat down, I could see that something was different. My mother avoided making eye contact with me, a habit she used when she didn't want to speak, and my father seemed exhausted. The subject was ultimately raised after a tense supper and a protracted silence. With caution, my father said, "We need to talk about the trust fund." Adding hastily, he said, "You might not think this is good news." Then, clumsily, he began to explain that they had been using some of my trust fund in recent years. What did they spend the money on? Was my initial thought as I listened. My parents then gradually went over the specifics. A portion of the trust fund was utilized to pay for Gilda's legal fees when she was arrested for drunk driving. They also highlighted additional unanticipated fees and emergency expenses, such as my niece's hospital bills. A hopeful notion crossed my mind as I listened. Maybe they used some of it, but there must still be a considerable amount left. Then my mom said something. She was obviously guilty. Out of the initial $100,000 in the trust fund, she informed me that just $5,000 was left. There was just $5,000 left. I felt like I had been smacked across the face at that very moment. I wasn't sure how to respond at first. What happened to everyone else's money was all I could imagine. We never expected it to come to this. My parents stated again and over. Your sisters required assistance since they were in challenging circumstances. Family members ought to help one another. I just sat there listening to what they had to say, numb. My parents handled this money as though it were theirs to spend as they saw fit, even though it was meant to help me when I graduated from college and started my new life. The thing that troubled me the most was this. My parents showed no signs of regret at all. All my father could say was, "The family has to be together now. Please be understanding. We require your assistance." His demeanor gave me the impression that they wanted me to accept the circumstances without protest, but I was unable to agree. Why did you think it was okay to use my trust fund for other people's problems? I inquired. We thought we were making the best choice for the family, they claimed, repeating the same justifications. Their response was evasive, as though they thought I would eventually grasp. I didn't know how to react. It was an unreal conversation. I thought for years that this money had been saved for the times when I needed it most. When that moment arrived, however, I was informed that nearly nothing remained. I didn't become angry or raise my voice. I simply sat in silence, trying to take it all in. I recall glancing at my parents, sisters, and nieces around the table. They all appeared so normal, as though this Tuesday night was just like any other. For me too, though my future had been abruptly torn away. They hardly noticed when I left the house that evening. I became aware that everything had altered drastically at that point. My parents' decision to sacrifice me in order to keep my sisters safe was something I couldn't forget. I had the impression that I was only a backup source of more money that may be used if necessary. Knowing that the trust monies will never be retrieved was the most difficult aspect. There was nothing I could do about it, and it was gone totally. I made the decision that I no longer wanted to depend on my family after going through this horror with the trust fund. I saved $2,000 from gardening labor and scholarships to go to college. I was entirely dependent on the few money I had managed to build in the absence of the trust fund and my family's financial assistance, even though it wasn't easy. I was determined to keep going since I knew that whatever I made after that would belong to me. I came to the realization that I couldn't trust my life to those who didn't care about my goals or future. I worked nonstop for the following few years. I took on as much work as I could and worked on the weekends and holidays. I obtained my degree and had no debt by the time I graduated. This was a huge accomplishment for me, even though many of my friends had trouble paying their college debts. I carried on with the landscaping I had started in high school. I didn't have much money, but I made enough to get by. My long-held ambition came true a few years after I graduated from college. I hired a few men to help me run my landscaping firm, registered it formally, and it started to grow. I had 6 individuals working for me on regular contracts. The company was doing well, and I wasn't concerned about making payroll or paying expenses. I felt like I was creating something I was proud of for the first time. At home, things had gotten worse. While caring for their kids, my sisters kept working at my parents' shop. I learned that my parents weren't making much money and were still paying for the majority of my sisters' living expenses via common acquaintances and old neighbors. In order to provide for my sisters in times of need, my parents would spend all of their savings. Sincerely, I had given up on mending my connection with my parents, even though I had a lot I wanted to say to them. They should take responsibility for the consequences as they made their own decision. I took the decision 2 years ago to see if my parents had fulfilled their pledge to restore the trust money. I believed there could be anything remaining, but I wasn't expecting a miracle. I called a lawyer and requested that they look into it. The outcomes were surprising. According to the lawyer's report, the account balance was $3,456. This was even less than what my parents had said was left, which was $5,000. I was filled with rage as I gazed at the person. In addition to spending the majority of my trust fund, they kept taking money out of the account after telling me about it. I was so angry that I contacted my parents and insisted on finding out how this could have happened. I questioned them directly about why the sum was lower than what they had previously said. There was a lengthy pause before my father began to make worthless excuses about unforeseen costs and family assistance. They had concealed this information from me and still treated the funds intended for my future as an unlimited resource after all these years. For me, that was the final straw. I declared it to be over. I would no longer call them on their birthdays or come visit them on holidays. I made the decision to live independently of them the day the trust fund problem was revealed. I didn't want to hear their baseless justifications or be drawn into their troubles any longer. I stopped communicating with them altogether. I had no doubt that my parents would make another attempt to get in touch. As anticipated, they celebrated my birthdays and the holidays with presents, letters, and modest messages. "Family is the most important," and "we miss you" were among the words written in the notes, but I no longer felt any connection. I didn't want to read the reasons in their letters, so I sent the gifts back unopened. It stung at first, to be honest. I frequently considered phoning them to express how much they had wounded me, but I knew it would not alter anything and that they would only make the same excuses, which would only make me feel worse. I just let the time go by and focused on my everyday life while working. I thought that was sufficient since I had established a life for myself without them. They were no longer necessary in my life. I felt in charge of my life once more after establishing a reliable business and accumulating a substantial amount of money. And occasionally, I pondered what my grandparents would say if they realized that money was intended as a gift to help me build my future and give me a chance at a better life. But my parents wasted it by using it for my sisters rather than me. Nevertheless, I could claim that everything in my life was going well, and I had come to terms with the fact that I would never see a dime of that trust fund. I believed I had been getting by without the trust fund, until my fiancé discovered an unexpected discovery. He was well aware of my family's problems and the trust fund issue because we had been dating for a number of years. He was understanding of everything I didn't want to deal with and had been there for me from the start. I didn't think he was related to my family, but one night he told me something startling. He had apparently been communicating with my family in secret. I was initially shocked and stood there in complete disbelief. He took a seat next to me and started talking softly. He disclosed that he had contacted my family on Facebook a month prior. He had been considering his role in repairing our relationship. What surprised me the most was that he had not told me about this. He said that he was afraid that if he informed me, I would become upset and break up with him. He had concealed it for a whole month for that reason. He even went to a restaurant to meet my mother. He said that their chat had touched him. My mother broke down in tears as she said how much she missed me and how much she wished she could have been at my wedding. I simply listened to his narrative while sitting calmly. I made a valiant effort to figure out why he had done this behind my back. He said it again and again. I did it for us. He expressed his desire for me to break off my ties with my parents. I am aware of how much he cherishes family. I am also aware that his family is quite close. He didn't know what else to do because he had never been treated the way I had been treated by my. The fact that he had kept it a secret for a whole month concerned me the most, even though I can appreciate his desire to be helpful. He opted to keep quiet because he was so worried about hurting our relationship, even though I wanted him to trust me enough to tell me. My mother contacted him the night before the wedding and begged him to help bring the family back together. She kept saying that she wanted to be present at a significant event in my life and that she missed me a lot. He felt terrible about keeping it a secret, but he was scared that if he informed me, I would call off the wedding. He cried and apologized. His parents phoned me later and begged me to pardon him. His father, who regarded me like family and had been there for me from the day we first met, talked earnestly on the phone. He informed me that he couldn't bear to see us part ways and that I was crucial to his son. He said that he considered me to be his daughter. I was astonished to hear such remarks. Hearing it from his father caused me to reevaluate my feelings towards his family. which I had always believed was closer than mine. I thus made the decision to pardon him. Even though I sympathized with him, I made it plain that I no longer wanted to be involved in family matters. He agreed that I should take care of things on my own, accepted my desires, and vowed never to get in touch with my family again. But this event triggered old scars. For years, I had buried it. My family resurfaced in my life just when I believed I had moved on, and my sisters seized the chance right away. They arrived at my place of employment accompanied by their nieces. Despite their kind demeanor, I was unable to determine if they were truly delighted to meet me or whether they had other plans. They began discussing how much they had missed me and thinking back on their past transgressions. Their anguish was evident, and they appeared to be truly sorry. I wasn't the target of malice. They clarified that they hadn't considered the repercussions of their acts because they were still young. But they acknowledged that their youth was no justification, and that, as adults, they ought to have behaved more properly. The nieces then inquired as to why I had ceased visiting. Their innocent, inquisitive expressions gave me the impression that I had abandoned them for no apparent reason. The emotional shame I was feeling at the time was piercing my heart. At first, I was upset with my sisters for using the trust fund, but now I realized that my mother was mostly to blame. My father had been drawn into my sister's years-long deception and was helpless to stop it. The sisters informed me that my parents' relationship has soured ever since. They also mentioned that my father believed he had lost me as a result of the circumstance. Additionally, they disclosed that my father had harbored jealousy of my intimate bond with my fiancé's family, particularly his father. They acknowledged that they were unsure if things could ever return to normal and stated that it would take time for things to recover. It was difficult to forget the past, and even with a great deal of remorse, things could never be the same again. I was really worn out after they departed. I felt as though all of the feelings I had been holding inside suddenly came flooding out. Even though I wanted to move on, let go of the past, and forgive them, I was still unable to forgive them completely for what they had done. I reasoned that I may be able to forgive them if they gave me back the trust fund I was entitled to. As I was absorbed in these thoughts, my father sent me a message. He requested a private meeting with me. He also stated that he really wanted to tell me something, even if it was too late. Even though I was still skeptical, I couldn't help but wonder what my father was trying to communicate. I made the decision to meet him and went to the agreed-upon spot. The family store was a long way away. I was a little surprised to see my father when I got there. He appeared very different from his previous appearance, with the signs of aging carved all over him, as if he had lost his prior vibrancy and vigor. My father started talking when we sat down. He clarified that he had addressed my mother after learning that she was misusing my trust fund. But he decided to keep her safe since he thought it would ruin the family. He emphasized again and over that he made the conscious decision to be with her, even if it meant betraying my confidence. His visage was laced with regret. In all honesty, he acknowledged that he had envied my relationship with my future father-in-law. He said that when he was unable to take action, my fiancé had stepped up and gained my trust. My father started crying shortly after that. I had never saw him weep before. He seemed to be carrying the burden of not wanting this to be how things ended. "I don't hate you," I said to him. "Nothing is owed to me anymore, and I've moved on from the past." I clarified that I had no intention of harboring anger because the trust money would not be returned and the obligation he believed he owed me had already been paid off. After our talk, I proposed that my sisters and nieces join me for supper. My mother was not welcome, though, and I made it obvious. This was about the hurt my mother had caused us and the years of treachery she had imposed on my father. My mother, of course, heard about this. I had assumed she would eventually find out, but to be honest, I didn't give a damn at the moment. In an effort to mend our connection, my mother contacted me and apologized. I said, "If you truly wish for that, start by returning the $100,000 you squandered without anyone knowing." When my mother heard this, she became quiet. She kept making the same justifications during our last phone conversation. "It was for the family, for the sisters," she stated. But my personality had changed. Calmly, I said, I understand. If such is the case, we will take legal action. Over the phone, I could hear her gasp. She questioned, What do you mean? I've looked over all the documents and spoken with a lawyer. I went on, I am fully aware of how and where you took money out of my trust fund. What was most notable was not just the $5,000 that was first reported, but also the extra $11,500 that vanished later. Could you elaborate on that? There was a lengthy pause, and then my mother remarked, cautiously, It was for you. That's enough, I politely interrupted her. Next week, you will receive court paperwork. In addition to damages of $95,000, we also want to be compensated for mental pain. News of the lawsuit created a big commotion among the family, as was to be expected. My father was the first to get in touch with me. He said, I want to tell you the truth, with a voice full of weariness. Your mother was solely responsible for it. I ignored her repeated claims that she was in need of money. My mother removed money from the trust fund, and my father acknowledged that he had maintained thorough records of it. He promised to present these papers as proof. Unexpectedly, a short while later, Gilda called. She declared, I'm going to testify too, in a voice full of unflinching resolve. She also misled us. I mistakenly believed that the majority of that money was for living expenses or medical bills. My mother's dishonesty was revealed, piece by piece, as the trial progressed. She had spent my trust fund on trips with friends and fancy brands, despite her claims that she was using it to help my sisters. Without a doubt, my mother's activities were proven by the testimony of my father and sisters. My claim was entirely supported by the court, which mandated that my mother pay back the full trust fund plus interest and mental anguish damages. My family was forced to sell the shop they had been running as a result. I stood at my new office window, gazing out over the city, a year after the verdict. By this point, my landscaping company had expanded to employ over 20 people. In contrast to earlier, I had also re-established a good relationship with my father and sisters. They were trying to make amends for their transgressions. I recently played in the park with my nieces, and their naive smiles confirmed that I had made the correct decision. I invited the families of my sisters and father to the wedding. I didn't invite my mother, though. She continues to defend her behavior and declines to offer an apology. Nevertheless, I made the decision to accept it and go forward. To defend what is most important, you may need to confront your family at times. That stage was the courthouse for me. I was able to take a real step towards reconciliation as a result of concealed realities coming to light. At first, family get-togethers without my mother felt a little lacking. But partnerships based on openness and trust were much more consoling than those based on dishonesty and secrecy. The most important thing I took away from this protracted experience was that